Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Hello, gang. Welcome back to another eerie episode. We're happy to have you with us here this evening. The rains have finally stopped here in SoCal. We're finally drying out, one sunny day at a time. And I hope it's a fine evening wherever you are here this evening. And I hope wherever you are, you're comfortable and in a position to be uninterrupted, because I have a full slate of calls for you here tonight. All sorts of weird ones. Human taxidermy, guardian angels, and the king of rock and roll. But it's with a seance that we begin here this evening. Please welcome Maddie, out of the state of Texas.
Hey there, this is Maddie from North Texas. I was just listening to season 17, episode 16. There was a woman talking about how her mother used to take her to seances, and that totally just rang a bell in my head. My grandmother, who unfortunately I can't ask for any more specifics because she does have dementia with Lewy body, but this is one of my favorite stories that she used to tell me, and she only really ever talked about it when my grandfather wasn't around. He was a pretty heavy Catholic. She really wasn't, but she still respected his beliefs and everything. And anyway, when she was a kid, in like the late 40s in Puerto Rico, her mother and father used to host seances, and the entire neighborhood would come. I mean, to the point that, if you will, everyone in the living room and surrounding rooms were nut to butt so that they could watch my great-grandparents perform these seances. They would bring my grandmother when she was a child around with them, and she was always somewhere packed tightly in the room with all of her neighbors, everyone she knows locally that has walked far and wide to get there. Her mother was the one that kind of facilitated the whole thing, but her father was the medium, I guess you would say. And anyway, there was a time I think she didn't really believe what was going on. I mean, they were so deep in this seance that they had literally conjured someone else. And her father had this other voice, and she really didn't understand that this other voice was coming from someone or something else. I think she just kind of assumed that her father was being playful, and so she quickly, in the middle of the seance, ran up to her father, and her mother stopped her very quickly and said, "Carmen, no," and in Spanish told her to get back, not to touch him, not to say anything to him, and not even to look into his eyes. She did look up at him, afraid. I don't think she looked quite directly into his eyes, but she did say that he was kind of contorted and smiling back at her. And though he was not speaking in that moment with that voice that she didn't recognize, she could tell just in his face that he was not there and that this was someone else that had overtaken her father's body. And she just silently, quickly kind of scattered back to her position in the room and let it go. And I don't even really know what else happened or what other kind of seances she saw or experienced because she just wouldn't talk about it. It was really a special and rare occasion if she opened up about these things. Anyway, I just thought that would be a really good one to share with you guys. Love the podcast. Love what you're doing, Derek. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Maddie. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure how much stock I put in the practice of conducting seances. But boy, do I enjoy the pageantry of it, especially back in the day. Real or fake, some of these conjuring attempts really went all out. But as much difficulty as I have suspending my disbelief on the subject, stories like Maddie's here do a great job of making me second-guess myself. Because it certainly sounds like something was up with the father. So maybe he was possessed by a spirit of the dead. Or perhaps it was just part of the show. Either way, I love the story, Maddie. And I can see why it's one of your favorites as well. Now, folks, my math tells me that we have time for one more quick call before we have to take our first break of the evening. So please welcome Emily from Parts Unknown.
Hi there, my name is Emily. I'm a newer listener to the podcast and wanted to share my story. So I grew up in a Northern California town called Morgan Hill. My family lived in a very long ranch-style home on about 2 acres with a smaller vineyard off of this road called Watsonville Road. The area is not necessarily the middle of nowhere. However, it's in a major agricultural area with no streetlights where the homes can be really quite distanced apart. It was summer. I was home from college, so this must have been around 2012 or 2013. So I slept on one end of this long ranch home, and my parents slept on the very other end. And Morgan Hill gets extremely hot during the summer. So I had the slats of my window angled slightly open to allow for some airflow one night. It was super late. I'd been up reading, probably about 1 a.m. or so. I turned off my lights, and I was settling to go to sleep when something large appeared in my window. Now, I never got a great look at it. However, I noticed it immediately because it contains these pulsating, blinking lights. And it just hovered in my window for a period of time. The first thought that occurred to me was that it reminded me a lot of the Disneyland light show because they were multiple pastel colors in multiple shades. But the weirdest part about this thing in the window was that it was absolutely silent. You know, I've listened to similar stories about flying objects or UFOs on this podcast where people report hearing some kind of droning noise, but there was no noise that was coming from this thing. I was frozen in absolute terror. I've never felt that scared and shocked in my entire life or since then, just because I couldn't make sense of it and I didn't really know what it was. Eventually, I turned over to face away from it in bed, and I sort of willed it to go away. I had this overwhelming sensation that while it floated in my window, it was almost trying to decide whether it wanted to take me or not. And eventually, after what felt like an eternity, but probably wasn't any longer than 1 minute, this thing just sort of floated away and left my window. It was many years before I ever shared this story with anyone, so I thought I'd share it here. It's been really formative in shaping my views on UFOs or any kind of mysterious stories that people share. So thanks so much, and great job on the pod.
Thanks, Emily. Now, given the circumstances and based on the behavior of the object, I'm quick to suggest that it might be a drone. But the lack of sound makes it hard to sell that theory. Drones, especially the commercially available kind, make a loud buzzing sound with their propellers. Something you'd think Emily would be able to hear. But outside of that, I don't have a clue what this object was. But I do know that you did the right thing, Emily, by sharing the encounter here with us. So thank you again for making the call. Now, gang, it's time for a quick break, but I'll be right back with more scares right after this.
Forgot the games we did.
Bill, price, and accessories.
And I drank it, and I couldn't believe the difference.
Alright, back to the action with this entry from Mimi, also in parts unknown.
Hi, this is Mimi. The story is from Central Illinois. I used to be a resident of Central Illinois, and it would have taken place during the early 2000s. I grew up in a parsonage, which for anyone who does not know what that is the home provided by a church to a ministerial family where the pastor and their family will live. Typically, the only people who will have ever lived in a parsonage would be a pastor's family for that specific church. Well, my story in regards to that house isn't too significant. It was just when I was in middle school, maybe around 12 years old. I had been watching TV, and during you know how sometimes they have a little blackout period between commercials? If it just couldn't be cut correctly, it was like that. And in the screen, I saw a very tall black shadow walk through the archway that reflects off of the TV. And I was completely home alone. So naturally, being 12, that is more than enough to freak me out. I felt like I was being watched. I felt frozen in my little spot. It's been maybe 18 years since that happened. However, the real story is a year after that. We had moved to Southern Illinois, and the pastor who took over for my father, she had moved into the same house, the same parsonage. Well, she called us after we had moved about a year later, and she said, "How do I get these kids at the church to stop messing with me?" And my dad was like, "What are you talking about? We never had any issues with pranksters or anything like that. Nothing whatsoever. Not at all. So much so that we would often leave the doors unlocked." What she had said is that she had been hearing people running up and down the hall in this little house. When she was home alone, she lived by herself, not married, no kids. She even came home once after service to the kitchen faucet on and all of the kitchen dining room tables on top of the dining room table. So all the chairs on the table and the faucet on, that is definitely a classic spooky story, but the most compelling part was that she was very anti all of that. She didn't believe in any of that stuff. So she was certainly convinced after that. But that's the last I ever heard of that story. So whoever's living there now, I hope they're having a pleasant experience. Thank you very much, Monsters Among Us podcast, for your awesome stories. This is like a classical storytelling format, which is so cool as a former professional storyteller myself.
Thank you, Mimi. How's that for confirmation? Mimi saw some sort of shadowy figure in the reflection of her TV. And without any sort of prompting, the next inhabitant of that parsonage too began to report activity. That has to make you feel at least somewhat validated, Mimi. And maybe a little creeped out as well. And that would be understandable, because the activity described in this call was all kinds of unsettling. So thanks again, Mimi, for sharing the story. Now, gang, let's hear from another clergyman's child, coincidentally from Illinois. Please welcome Nick to the program.
Hey, Derek. This is Nick from Central Kentucky. This story happened to me when I was about 4 or 5, and actually we were living in a small little town in Illinois called Fairbury. My dad was a minister and was trying to find a place to put our church, so he had been doing some work for a lady whose husband had recently died, and she was looking to utilize the funeral home that they had. So he rented that out from her, and so we actually lived in the parsonage area of the funeral home. And I always just had like a weird creepy feeling, as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I didn't really know a lot about ghosts, or I didn't really think a lot about what that might mean. But one night, it was somewhere around bath time, I remember, the lights were kind of dim in my room, and my parents would give me a old realistic cassette recorder, and I would just put it in my room while I played, and they would send the tapes in to my grandma. So this one night, I'm in my room, and I'm getting ready for bed or whatever, and I just heard this noise come from the cassette recorder, and it just sounded like an old kind of crony lady. That's at least the closest I could get. It just kind of sounded like, hello. And I immediately looked at the cassette recorder because it seemed to be coming from there, and I thought maybe it was on play, maybe it was stuck or something like that. And I mean, it was totally off. It was not on at all. I always just had a weird feeling about that. I ran and told my parents, and they were like, we don't know. So I don't know if it was just, a 4 or 5-year-old's imagination, or if, one of the people from the funeral home just was looking for an avenue to reach out. I'd love to know. But before that, my parents had lived in another neighboring town called Pontiac, and the house that I moved into right after I was born, my mom said that the upstairs of the house, when they first moved in, wasn't finished yet. It had kind of been trashed out and stuff, so they just kind of used it for storage space for the first little while. And she would be down in the kitchen, and the stairway up to the top of the second floor was directly off the kitchen. And so she would be in the kitchen getting stuff ready, and they would hear like furniture being scooted across the floor. It was like a wooden subfloor or whatever, and they could just hear stuff being scooted across or dropped and slammed and opened. And so my dad, being a minister, just got a friend, and they went up there and they prayed, told the spirit it wasn't allowed to live there anymore, and then they said it never came back. So don't know. It's kind of one of those weird stories I heard much after the fact, thankfully, because I don't think I would have slept at all if I would have known that when I was little. But anyway, love the show. Thanks so much for giving me lots of sleepless nights. All right, thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Nick. Now, oddly enough, those two coincidences weren't planned, and I didn't even notice the connection at first. Connor had to point it out to me. Both children of clergymen, both from a small town in Illinois, and both experiences involved electronics, a TV and a cassette player. And might I point out, both of these entries were selected at random. But these synchronicities happen all the time. But despite that, they still impress me each time that we stumble upon them. So thank you again, Nick, for sharing. And I'm glad that we can keep you up at night. Now, folks, if you have a tale to tell, give the hotline a call at 888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. Or record your story as a voice memo and email it to me at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. Now, there are a few guidelines to calling in. True stories only. 1 call per story. 1 story per call. If you need more time, call back and pick up where you left off. And above all else, call from a quiet place so we can hear what you're saying. It's that simple. My team and I will handle the rest. Oh, and don't forget, if you have a youngster that's into the paranormal, tune them into Monsters Among Us Jr. New episodes drop every other Wednesday. And if they have a story to share, have them call the hotline at 833-MAU-KIDS. Now, on to the next story. Please welcome Alex from that state up north.
What's up, all you wacky weirdos out there? This is Alex coming at you from Detroit, Michigan. I recently watched your documentary, Derek. the high desert one, man. That was an epic film, and in that, there's a scene which brought this out of me. So, in the scene, this guy's talking about how he's on the highway, and he sees these two lights that come up at him, and he thinks they're UFO lights. That very same thing happened to me one morning driving from Detroit to Charlotte. I was going to work. It was about 6:30 in the morning, pitch dark. I'm the only one on the road, and I'm driving down the road, and I look in the rear view, and it looks like there's a freaking car. I see two lights coming right at me. This thing looks like it's going 130, 140 miles an hour. And it comes so fast, it did a quarter mile, half mile, mile in seconds. So I saw this, and immediately I just braced for impact because it got so close. I thought for sure this dude's going to hit me. He's coming right in, and he's going to freaking whack me. So all I remember is like bracing, closing my eyes, and like wincing. And then nothing happened. And I opened my eyes, and there was nothing there. There was no car. There was nothing there. And this happened. I thought about it. I thought it was just a crazy driver until I saw that scene in your documentary. Then I realized, no, man, there was no car. There was nothing there. That was too fast, too eerie, and too weird. Anyways, love your show, man. I hope to hear some wacky ones.
Thank you, Alex. Now, of course, Alex is talking about our film Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. And specifically, he's talking about an interview we did with podcaster Ken Lane. And since it's our movie, we can share of it what we want. So here is a clip from that film. A story that's very reminiscent of Alex's report.
I had an experience with those in Amboy, which is in the desert about an hour and a half north of here, which was a couple of bright white lights behind me that I thought was CHP, and that was a cop. These lights come right up behind me, and all I thought, of course, was cop, ticket, higher insurance. So I had no paranormal thoughts, but then nothing happens. There's no red light, there's no cop sound from the car, and my opinion of it changes, and I think, is some jerk who's come right up behind me, and it's totally open road, so they should just pass. No one passes me, so I start doing the road rage thing. I'm gonna just slow down. I'm on cruise control, down. Okay, 25. Nothing. I come to a total stop. I finally turn my head because I'm just seeing the lights blinding me in the rear view. And I look, and it's just two white lights. And as soon as I turn and look, they retreat backwards. Shoots all the way down, and the lights blink out. And I sit there for a minute, because I'm now stopped in the middle of the road. And I think I ought to drive down there and kick that guy's ass or something. And then sanity returns. No, you're not gonna go chase somebody who's playing chicken with you on a dark desert highway. So I drive on, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, it just suddenly hits me. That wasn't a car. There was no car. I told that story. A guy came right up to me afterwards, and he said that same thing happened to me on that same road.
Once again, that's Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. And the full film can be found for free on Prime or Tubi. And I agree here, Alex. The two stories do sound awfully similar. Now, of course, we have no way of identifying whatever these lights were. But the fact that it's been reported by more than one person has to mean something, right? Well, either way, thank you again, Alex, for sharing the entry.
It gets hot. But again, it goes back to the fact that it's hard to have confidence in a team.
Los Angeles Rams football games. They're nightmare.
Now who's up for more ghostly activity? Please welcome Victoria out of Georgia.
Hi, Derek. My name is Victoria. I'm in South Georgia. I guess this was back in about 2017. My son was about 4 years old, and I was getting him ready for school. And we were in the bathroom. He was getting a bath. And he looks at me and he says, "Mama, who's that man over by the sink?" And I look over and I said, "Son, there's not a man there." And he says, "Yes, Mama, there is." And I said, "Well, what's he look like?" And he says, "Well, he has long hair, glasses, wearing a white dress, and sandals." And I was like a little spooked out. So I was like, "Oh, okay, well, let's go get dressed." So I wrap him up in a towel. We go to a whole nother room, and I'm getting him ready. And he looks at me and he says, "Mama." I said, "Yes, son." He says, "That man." I said, "Yeah, what about him?" And he says, "He followed us. He's behind you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, let's go to school." Finished getting him ready, and I put him in the car, and we go on to school. Well, later that day, I called my mother, and I said, "Mama, Damon saw a man in the bathroom today." And she says, "I wonder if he saw Jimmy," which is my stepdad who actually passed away in that house from cancer. I was like, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, I'm going to send you a picture and you show it to him when he gets home." And I said, "Okay." So I showed him the picture and he started crying. He says, Mama, that's the man. And I was like, "Oh, well, that's just Papa Jimmy, and he actually passed away before I found out I was pregnant with my son. So my son actually never knew him." A couple days later, he comes running out of his bedroom. I'm in the kitchen cooking, and he says, "Mama, that man, he's back in my room." And I was like, "Okay." So I walked in there and I said, "Listen, I know that you're just checking on him, but you're scaring my son. Would you please leave?" And he's never come back again. I have one more story. It's actually another ghost story in the same house that I was living at the time that happened with my son. My husband worked night shift at the local chicken plant and would leave about 1 o'clock in the morning. And about an hour or two later, I would have my bedroom door shut. And of course, I'd have all my children with me because I'm a scaredy at night. I don't like being alone. And so I'd have all of my babies with me. And so I closed my door and we would sleep with the door shut. Well, about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, my bedroom door would slam open and hit the wall, and my bed would start shaking. And this happened almost every night, and I'd wake up scared, sit up straight, look around, see if I could see anything, and I wouldn't see nothing, so I'd lay down, and I'd try to go back to sleep. But first, it took me a while to go back to sleep, but then I got used to the door slamming and the bed shaking, and I'd just go back to sleep. That's my story. I love your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for calling in. Now, Victoria's call gave me a thought. Just imagine being a ghost. You likely still want to feel like part of the family, but in doing so, you scare the bejesus out of your younger family members. What a conundrum. And thank you again, Victoria, for sharing the story that made me think of it. Now, folks, if you would, meet me in the Pacific Northwest, where Kelly is waiting with her tale.
Hi, Derek. My name is Kelly. I live in Washington State. However, the story I'm about to tell you happened actually in Montana, probably close to 50 plus years ago. It actually happened to my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. And my mother-in-law told me the story first. And my sister-in-law, I was so intrigued by the story, I asked her, and she confirmed the same story through her eyes. So it starts with those two driving in Montana, and they were going up a mountainous or hilly region with a steep embankment down to the right of their vehicle. And in those days, at least in this section, there weren't guardrails. along this embankment. And also in those days, there wasn't a requirement to wear seatbelts, which weren't as good as they are now, but they were still helpful. And I know my mother-in-law did not like wearing seatbelts, so most likely she and or her daughter weren't wearing them at the time. Anyway, as they're going up this steep region, coming around the bend was a semi-truck, which had crossed over the center lane as it was coming around the corner and was going straight for them. And my mother-in-law, in reaction, veered off to the right down this steep embankment. And my mother-in-law is a very religious person. And so she was one of those people that practiced religiously, went to church all the time, and devoted her life to her family and to her faith. So she began exclaiming, "Help us, God. Oh, Lord, help us. Lord, help us," as they're going down this hill, because she knew it was certain death as they're going down this bumpy, steep road, and they were going to die because that's, the reality of it. How would they survive it, at least in her mind? And then the next second, she knows she's on the road again, going straight, not down that embankment. There was no way possible physically in our natural world that she could go 1 second down this hill and the next she's back on the road again. She looks over at her daughter, who was braced up against the glove compartment of the car with her hands on it, with her head looking out the window with her mouth wide open in awe. And her daughter says to her, "Mama, Mama." An angel picked up the front of our car and put us back on the road again. And she swears to this day that's what happened. She's a school teacher, works with special ed children. She's an amazing lady. I trust her statement. I've known her for most of my life. And both of them, they're not people that would just tell a story like that. It truly happened to them. They both experienced it. They both told the story from their perspective, with the slight difference of being my mother-in-law didn't see the being with wings like my sister-in-law did. She knew something happened because she couldn't explain it. To this day, that story still gives me shivers and a good feeling inside that we're being watched over. And I just hope you can use my story, and I've been enjoying your podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. That's not the first time we've heard a story like that. We have dozens of first-hand accounts almost exactly like this one. People in peril, only to have a mysterious stranger intervene at the very last second. A stranger that later manages to disappear. And those stories are typically quite incredible, just like Kelly's here. So thank you again, Kelly, for taking time to share your family's story. Now, gang, this next one comes to us anonymously. Please welcome this mystery caller from parts unknown.
Hi, Derek. I was just listening to an episode, I think it was season 16, and this guy talked about when he had his baby and then there's a big light in the room. And it kind of reminded me to want to tell my story. This was before I was born, I want to say a month or two before I was born. My mom told me this story, and she had said that she had already had my name said. She wanted to name me Darlene. Disclosure, I'm not going to give my name, but that's my middle name now. So she said that she had a dream before she had me, and in the dream she said that she had this strong white light come up to her. She couldn't really see it. It was like a shining light. That's how she described it. Like someone's coming close to you, but you're kind of blinded by the light. And she said there was a voice that told her to name me my first name. I don't want to say, but it told her to name me that, and that it slowly faded away, and that she ended up waking up And she was just like, wow. And I had asked her, like, oh, well, you know, were you scared? Was this a scary feeling for you? Like, what was it? She had said that it was a very peaceful feeling. She wasn't scared at all. And that happening made her give me my name now. And that she wasn't an Amy Darlene, but then she ended up putting that as my middle name. And yeah, that's kind of my story. I just thought it was so interesting and neat, and how that guy, when his daughter came in and there's a strong light, only when, like, people are born does that seem to happen. And I believe in angels and demons, and I don't know. I like to think of it as, like, my guardian angel kind of guiding her. But it's also, I see it as, like, almost a blessing, and I'm kind of, like, protected, and I have a guardian angel over me. That's kind of my story. Catch y'all later. Keep it spooky. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. You know, the day this episode drops happens to be Elvis Presley's birthday. He would have been 91, if I'm remembering correctly. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that when Elvis was born, his father Vernon claims to have saw a strange light outside his home the moment the twins came into the world. Now, the story comes from a book called Alien Rock, The Rock and Roll Extraterrestrial Connection by Michael Luckman. And according to Luckman, the following story was passed on by Elvis's hairstylist and spiritual guide, Larry Geller. And according to Geller, this is how it all went down, pulled directly from Luckman's book. Thousands of Elvis fans also make the pilgrimage to the Elvis Presley Center in Tupelo, Mississippi, to see the small 2-room wooden shack where Elvis was born on January 8, 1935, at 3:30 a.m. on a snowy winter day in the midst of the Great Depression. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, referred to the story of the strange blue light as rock and roll's own Star of Bethlehem. According to Larry Geller, Elvis's father claimed the following. As I looked around, son, I noticed something strange. The whole area around the house was lit up with a blue light. It seemed to surround the house. And just at that moment, the wind stopped blowing. It was so still you could hear a pin drop. Now the blue light startled Vernon, so he ran back inside the shack, where he learned of the birth of Elvis and his stillborn brother, Jesse. From that moment on, a legend was born. Now, given the source of this information, it's tough to take it at face value, sort of like a game of telephone. But ever since I first heard this story about Elvis, from the boys at Bigfoot Collectors Club, if I recall correctly, I haven't been able to get it out of my head. And when I heard our caller's tale, it was one of the first things that I thought of. So thank you again, caller, for sharing the tale. And happy birthday, Elvis. Now, folks, it's time for another quick break, but don't touch that dial. When I return, human taxidermy.
Ski pants, ski top, gloves, packed in a tiny 2-ounce bottle.
Proposals to change the law.
Take a teaspoon of this powder and...
Now, before we push play on that call I've been teasing, let's first share this one from Abby in the state of Arizona.
Hi, Derek. My name is Abby from Flagstaff, Arizona. The first story that I'd like to share is actually from when I was younger. I was about 7 or 8, and me and my family lived in Phoenix, Arizona, in a pretty decent home, but this home was haunted. And there were a lot of different things that would happen in this house. Like, my father would hear voices, but there would be no TV. We would be asleep or not home. My father would also be trying to fall asleep, and he would feel somebody sit on the bed thinking that it was my stepmother, but she would be working at night, so it obviously wasn't her. One time we walked into the home and all of the cabinets were open and the drawers were open. It became such a thing in our house that we started calling the ghost Fred. And Fred was super harmless, nothing malicious about the energy of the house. Like, you would walk in and it was a normal house, and you could feel an energy, but it wasn't bad, nor was it necessarily comfortable. But a couple of specific experiences I wanted to talk about. So the first one, this was back in like 2007 or 2008 when Taps was still a show on TV. And this is the show that predated Ghost Adventures, and it was super awesome. But I was sitting on the couch with my father one evening. He is a musician, so he was playing his guitar. And we had just gotten done watching an episode of Taps on Tombstone, Arizona. And I'm sure you have lots of stories about Tombstone. But me being a kid, I was talking about how much I don't believe in ghosts and how ridiculous of a notion it is that things exist like that and that they would have any power over us as beings. And in a silly way, I was just saying it was dumb, basically. And my dad's sitting there, he's smiling at me, and he looks at me, kind of quirky, and says, well, ghosts come after the ones that don't believe. And no sooner does he get done saying that than the lamp in our living room, the only source of light, shuts off. And so for a second, I was stunned. I'm 7 and I'm just saying how stupid ghosts are, and all of a sudden the light turns off. And the way that this lamp was, at first, we were like, oh, it got unplugged somehow. And we were used to Fred. So we were like, whatever, we'll go plug it back in. And my dad's like, well, it's plugged into the wall. And so we think, oh, well, the light bulb must be loose. My dad goes to mess with it. He's like, no, the light bulb is nice and tight. The way that this lamp was it had a dial switch. So on the left side, you would have to click it to turn it on. And you would have to unclick it and turn it 180 degrees and click it on the right side to turn it off. The dial had been unclicked and turned off and clicked on the right side. And so we figured, oh, well, it's Fred. He just turned the light off to say, see, told you so. Another instance in this home was my parents bought me a toy dog that with batteries, it could turn on, it could blink, it could jump around, it could yip and yap and all of the things. And one night I was sitting and this dog turned on by itself and started doing things. I was so scared. I freaked out. I threw the toy across the room. I showed it to my dad. My dad almost didn't believe me. But again, there were so many stories about this house, weird shadow men and things that would disappear. And so, yeah, that is my haunted house story. We moved out of that home, thought Fred would follow us, but he didn't. So, yeah, thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Abby. A ghost named Fred. I always get a kick out of people naming their ghosts. And I've probably already mentioned this half a dozen times over the past decade, but my grandmother had a ghost named Charlie. Anytime anything weird would take place in her home, she'd simply dismiss it as, oh, that's just Charlie. And it sounds like Abby's family has taken the same approach. And I say good for them, if it helps them be comfortable with whatever they're sharing their home with. I say, go for it. Besides, that always makes for a great story. Just ask Abby. Thank you again, Abby, for taking the time to call. Now, gang, for that final call of the regular portion of the show, and that human taxidermy story that I've been dangling in front of you for about an hour now. So without further hesitation, please welcome Gary out of Canada.
Hi there, my name's Gary D, and I'm located up in Ontario, Canada. When I think back on some of the strange or odd experiences I've had through life, going way back to when I was just a young child, I remember when I was in middle school, I had to walk probably about 2.5 or 3 miles to get to school, and then the same thing back. Occasionally I got a ride, but a lot of times I walked. And it wasn't bad, I didn't mind it. It's just when it was snowing or raining, it kind of sucked. But the one memory I had, which at the time was just kind of neat, unique, interesting, never really thought much of it. But later in life, kind of looked back and said, yeah, that was kind of creepy. Let me explain to you what happened. When I walked back from school, I go through all these back road areas, kind of a residential area, but there was also a stretch where there was a lot of space between houses. So there'd be a house with a large yard, and then the next house down wouldn't be for maybe, 100 yards or so. So there was a lot of space between the houses, which was nice for the people that live there. They have some privacy. But I know there was one house in particular. I noticed one day there was a sign out front that said, Hochstetter's Taxidermy. And I'd met the fellow before, Mr. Hochstetter. He was a friendly guy. I'd see him out by the roadway sometimes as he pulled in. And I would talk to him and say hello. And he'd say, hello there, how are you, young fellow? And nice guy. I'm guessing at the time he was probably in his late 50s, early 60s. He lived alone. I thought, what is taxidermy? I thought maybe taxi, driving people around places. But I think I mentioned it to my mom or dad. And they said taxidermy means that he stuffs animals. And I said, stuffs animals? Like a piñata, fills them up with candy? And no. They explained what he does is that people bring him a dead animal, and then he pulls the skin off it, lets it dry, and then he kind of puts styrofoam or something in the middle of it, and then wraps the skin around it, and then paints it, and puts like a glossy finish to make it look real again. So he did this with animals, anything from a field mouse up to a grizzly bear or a moose. Like he did everything, as well as fish. So I thought that was kind of neat. So the one time I came back from school, I kind of snuck by that house. I noticed that his car wasn't there. So I figured, okay, he lives alone. I'm just going to go to the back to see, because at the back of his house, he had kind of an extension with some small windows. So I snuck back there. Nobody could see me because the house was pretty far from the next one. So no one could see that I was sneaking around. So I went to the window, put my hands up against it, looked inside. And when I looked inside, I saw all of these, some of the animals and fish were up on the wall on plaques or on a piece of wood. And they look beautiful. Some of them were done and painted up, and they looked like they were alive. And some of them were just the skin of the animals that was just drying and curing, I guess, before he was to paint them. And there was everything there. There were squirrels, rabbits, fox, a moose head he was working on. One thing I always remember was like there was a raccoon that was kind of up on its hind legs, like it was scared of something. But in any case, I thought that was kind of neat. So kind of made it part of my regular routine is on the way back, because I had that long walk, just to take a break, I would stop in and kind of sneak around the back to look in the window. And I'd look in, kind of see what new things he was working on. And even when he was home and I noticed his car there were hedges and bushes, so I could sneak back there and no one could see me. And I would watch him at work. I could see him stripping the skin off of both mammals and fish, doing his work, painting, putting glass eyes and things. And what I noticed, which I thought, oh, that's nice, because like I say, he was probably in his early 60s. I was surprised that his parents were still alive, because I could see that his mom and dad, I'm assuming that's who it was, would be sitting there watching him at work. And both of them were just sitting side by side and just, sitting there kind of leaning forward a bit, kind of watching him do his thing, probably very proud. So I went there, I would imagine probably, 15 or 20 times. And I started noticing that they were always there watching. And I had thought he lived alone. And I guess he didn't, unless maybe they came by for a visit. And every time I came, they would be sitting there watching him work and never moved, just kind of sat there, kind of leaning forward, really watching intently as to what he was doing. And, sometimes they'd be sitting close to him, other times they'd be, further back somewhere else sitting there, but they're all sitting side by side. It was kind of heartwarming. I thought that's so nice. His parents took an interest in what he did. So time went on and I kept coming by and I saw him. I think he did I can't remember if it was a mountain lion or was it like a large wild cat of some kind. And one time he looked up and I thought he saw me, but he kind of looked out for a while. I kind of hid behind the hedge. And anyways, I kind of sat there, and probably 3 or 4 months later, I went there, and there was suddenly a for sale sign. And I look, and I go to the back. His workshop area, we did the taxidermy, was totally cleaned out. There was just some cardboard on the ground, some pails, pieces of wood, some scraps on the ground, but everything was cleaned out. And I didn't see his car, in his parking spot. And I was kind of walking by the one day looking, and nobody was there. And I saw a neighbor out front. I think they were mowing their lawn. I said, "What's with Mr. Hochstetter? It seems empty. I noticed his car hasn't been there." He said, "Oh, no, he packed up and moved a few days ago. He's gone." I said, "He moved? They're selling the house?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "So just him and his mom and dad left?" They said, "Oh, no, just him." I said, "Well, no, were his mom and dad here visiting?" They said, "No. His mom and dad died like 15 years ago. They both passed at the same time. They were in an accident. They both passed. So he's been living there alone all this time." And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I saw them sitting there. And I saw them sitting in different places. Yeah, they were always leaning forward in the same position, never moving. Oh,
Thank you, Gary. Oh, is right. I think we can all put two and two together here. Mr. Hofstetter, whatever his name was, might have been a little too good at taxidermy. So good that he even stuffed his own parents. Allegedly. And that got us thinking over here in the studio. Has any other human ever been taxidermied? Well, the answer is likely to surprise you, because the answer is yes. There have been several examples from over the years, including but not limited to centuries-old cases of preservation, of exotic tribesmen, circus performers, and an 18th century visionary.
This is Jeremy Bentham, an English philosopher and social reformer who died in 1832. Before he passed away, he compiled a set of instructions regarding the disposal of his body. It was first to be dissected, then preserved and displayed. Accordingly, Bentham's skeleton was padded out with hay, dressed in his clothes, and put on display in his favourite chair, complete with a wax replica of his head. This auto-icon, as Bentham referred to it, changed hands several times before ending up in University College London's Student Centre. Bentham is admired for many of his principles, and so his preserved remains are displayed in accordance with his wishes. He was even allowed to sit in on a council meeting once in 2013, where he was recorded as present but not voting.
Now that clip from Fascinating Horror and shows us the lighthearted side of human taxidermy, if such a thing exists. But what about the darker side? I hear some of you asking. And what about more current cases of this unusual practice? Well, given that human taxidermy is essentially illegal globally, so examples are few and far between. But I did manage to find something that almost checks off all of the boxes, and it occurred in Penrose, Colorado, just 2 short years ago. The following clip is courtesy of KUSA, NBC News 9, out of Denver.
Outside the Return to Nature funeral home, investigators put up crime scene tape and searched through a hearse. Documents obtained by 9 News highlight new details on what went on inside the facility, where 115 bodies were found. The Colorado Department of Regulatory Agency says the owner of the funeral home claimed he practices taxidermy at the Penrose location and acknowledged that there was a problem on the property. When police executed a warrant, they found evidence that human remains were improperly stored, and the owner attempted to conceal them, state investigators say.
Without providing too much detail to avoid further victimizing these families, the area of the funeral home where the bodies were improperly stored was horrific.
While the sheriff in Fremont County promises an investigation, the coroner wants to ensure the families of the victims find closure.
I want to assure everyone that the loved ones in this facility will be treated with the utmost care and respect. Our hearts go out to everyone impacted by this tragedy, and we will take every measure possible to get families the answers they deserve.
The Return to Nature Funeral Home advertises green burials where bodies are not embalmed and often placed in wicker caskets. The state has now shut down all its locations as they work to determine what exactly the owner meant when he told investigators he practiced taxidermy here in Penrose. Mark Salinger, 9 News.
Now, updated claims suggest that the funeral home owner's mention of taxidermy was just an excuse to disguise the putrid smell emanating from the property, because some 190 bodies were left to rot in an unrefrigerated building behind the main office, and some of the bodies had been there for over 4 years. Dry concrete mix was given to loved ones instead of cremated remains. Now, the owners of the funeral home, a husband and wife team, are still awaiting sentencing. You never know what's going on behind closed doors. Most times you probably don't want to know. But it's amazing stuff, Gary. Thank you again for making the call. Oh, and by the way, we searched extensively for the taxidermist that Gary mentioned in his story, but without the proper spelling of the name, it was near impossible to track anything down. But if you happen to remember what he's talking about, or you know this taxidermist still today, do the right thing and reach out to us. monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us podcast is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes, Delaney Bowers, and Connor Ryan. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Be sure to like and follow us on our social media pages. Give us a like and follow on YouTube. Join our Discord server and leave us a rate and review wherever that sort of thing is possible. And don't forget, you can catch the show every Saturday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern on the UNX Digital Network. Just visit unxnetwork.com to tune in. Now, finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Now visit our merchandise shop, monstersamonguspodcast.com, and click the shop tab. And join us in the beyond. Stay tuned past the outro to learn how. Or just visit Monsters Among Us Podcast and click the Patreon tab. I'll see most of you on the other side. But for those of you that won't cross over, keep it spooky and have a good night.
The same goes for business.
And a waterfall of caviar.
All the difference. Exactly where we thought we'd be. All right, go on some more. Give me some more. Right free agent can make.
You've just stumbled upon the secret entry. And I always try to make the secret entries something strange, something unheard of, something unusual. And I'm hoping tonight's selection is at least one of those three. So please welcome JW to the program.
Hey Derek, it's JW from Alabama. This happened in 1996. I was approximately 6 years old. And, I'm laying in the bed beside my mom and dad. I had a hard time sleeping by myself back then. And all of a sudden, I just woke up. I can't recall anything in particular waking me up, and I didn't wake up startled or anything like that. There was no loud noises that woke me up. I just kind of woke up. I see the outline of something kind of hovering over my face. There was a night light in my mom and dad's master bathroom, and it was surprisingly bright enough to kind of give a very small glimmer of light into the rest of their bedroom, and that's probably how I was even able to see the outline of whatever was hovering over me. I couldn't make out a ton of the details, but here's what led me to believe that it was what I recall as the Sandman. The outline of this thing looked much like what you would see depicted in cartoons and movies and things of that nature of the Sandman. So, I'm awake, and all of a sudden I see the classic outline of a wizard hat, fairly baggy clothing. It freaked me out. It was not a welcoming sight for me to, see a dark figure hovering over me. And so I screamed. And as soon as I screamed, I hear a sound like a poof. And I feel a type of material literally hit my eyes. And I immediately fall asleep. I mean, a deep sleep. It was almost as if this thing knocked me out with whatever it threw at me. The next morning when I woke up, I asked my parents, "Did you see that thing?" "What thing?" "What are you talking about?" "I saw the Sandman." And, they passed it off as just a young boy's imagination. I was like, no, I saw something, and it threw something in my eyes. And they're like, "Oh, JW, we all have that in our eyes when we wake up." And yes, I understand now that I'm 33 that there's some biology involved with what you wake up, the crust on your eyes. I get it. But even still now, as an adult, I still stand by what I saw that night, what I experienced, what I felt. I don't know what it was, but to this day, I just call it the Sandman. I've never told anyone about this ever, other than my parents. Anyways, I appreciate your hard work for us, Derek. Peace.
Well, folks, what do you think? Weird enough for you? Thank you, JW, for creeping us out. Now let me tell you, if you can bottle that mystery material and put you to sleep, JW, I think you'd be a billionaire. That's the ultimate sleep aid. It's wild stuff, JW. The Sandman. Thanks again for calling in. Now, gang, this is the portion of the program where we venture beyond. The after show where we extend the good times and share more stories. To join us, simply visit monstersamonguspodcast.com and click the Patreon tab. A $5 pledge gives you all the back content, days worth of it at this point. And for $1, you can get all the main programming ad-free. It's in the beyond that you get to hear tales like this one from Anonymous and Bart's Unknown.
Hey, Derek. I'm gonna stay anonymous for this because it's not my story. It's my mom's, and she doesn't want people to think that she's crazy. I had her listening to the Best of 2022 podcast, and she heard the story about the guy that was driving home from, the gym that had the thing that he thinks but doesn't want to think was a fairy fly in front of his windshield, look at him, and then fly away. And all of the bugs and stuff that people keep telling him it probably was that he knows it isn't. When my mom and I were listening to the story, I was watching her face just kind of go pale, where I knew that she was hearing something that was really creeping her out. And I asked her what was wrong, and she says that when she was visiting my sister the summer before, so this would have been last year in July, I believe. Now, my mom, when she stays with my sister's in Nebraska, in Omaha specifically. My mom stays in a little one-room apartment in their basement. And, she's got her own entrance and exit. She's a little old lady. It makes her happy. But when she wakes up in the morning and everybody else has already gone to work, she makes herself a cup of coffee. And she goes and she sits outside on this little covered patio thing that my sister has down there. It's where she keeps, her flower garden, which is next to her vegetable garden. So it's a very pleasant little area that's very summer-esque, and it smells pretty.